So like November 1st, Seth Kenney calls Corporal Hancock, Detective Hancock at the time, and tells her that he thinks he knows where the live bullet came from. It's like a weird thing to say, like at this juncture, like, like why didn't he know right away? I don't know, whatever. Kenney says he thinks that it was Troy Teske, who is a friend of Thell Reed, who is Hannah Gutierrez Reed's father. And then what's odd too is that Kenney seems like again, like he's like a junior police detective or something, because he's got Troy Teske with him and he's like, hey, you want me to get Troy Teske on the line? And so then Troy Teske joins the call in like a three-way with Kenney and Hancock. And then Teske tells Hancock, the lead investigator, how Thell Reed had dropped off a batch of live ammunition at Teske's business for safe storage. I don't know if I actually have Teske on here. I don't think I had time, but regardless, he's like just like another guy in the armory industry, and that was like sort of buddies. And he has like another business that deals with like selling props to movies. So he says that like Thell Reed was in town and like he knew Teske, and Teske had a safer place to store the ammo. So Thell dropped off some live ammo at Teske's business for storage. And the other thing that's interesting is that Teske is a former police officer. And he's the guy that we'll see eventually will turn in the green bucket of bullets, the green ammo can, in March of this year at the end of Hannah's trial. So we'll come back to that. But so then Teske goes on to tell Corporal Hancock that after Thell Reed dropped his ammo off at his business, later on he comes back and then retrieves some of the live ammo and left some behind. So he takes some and he leaves some. And Kenney suggests that this live ammo could be from the same batch as the bullet that killed Helena. And then Kenney points the finger at Hannah and Thell as possibly being responsible for the live ammo getting onto the set. I don't know how he like came to the conclusion that Hannah was involved, since she wasn't directly involved in like the bullet stuff, but whatever, that's what he says. And this is all sort of based on the argument, like I said, of Luke Nikas, the defense counsel, who's making the argument for dismissal. Okay, so then Teske then says like Hancock wants to know, like, do you have any like pictures of these bullets, or can I see some? Teske sends Hancock a photo of 4 bullets. This is the photo that eventually Alex Spiro has a copy of and shows to the judge. That is, like I said, like the string that they pull that leads to them, this whole thing unwinding. And it's also a little bit unclear from like Nikas's presentation, because he's sort of using generic pronouns a lot to refer to he, but it sounds like Hancock takes the 4 bullets that Teske photographed, but then she doesn't bother preserving the other bullets that Teske had from the same source, which is that green ammo can. So she just takes the 4 bullets, leaves the other ones, and like, I guess, whatever, just forgets about it, or who knows. It's really weird, because like cops usually are pretty, like with evidence like that, they usually just take the whole thing. So it's very strange. But so that was in, like I said, like shortly after the shooting in 2021. We smash cut to 2 years later, and now we're in November 2023, and it's on the eve of Hannah's trial. And Teske is a witness in that trial. He's on the witness list, and he's doing what's called a pretrial interview with Special Prosecutor Carrie Morrissey, who's she was the new prosecutor, so she probably hadn't had an interaction with him.
Is she the one that takes her glasses on and off about 10,000 times a minute?
And she was the one that was the main prosecutor in this trial, and the one that was testifying at the end. And so what Morrissey like starts asking Teske like a lot more probing questions about these bullets than her predecessor, who for whatever reason the old prosecutors that ended up like resigning didn't like bird dog this. They didn't follow it up. But when Morrissey starts like asking about it, Teske, starts telling her this whole story about how he was holding on to some stuff for Thell Reed, and Morrissey happens to ask him like, well, do you still have any of this ammo? And Teske's like, yeah, I've got some of it, but like, I told Hancock about it like 2 years ago, and she never came and picked it up. So I've been shooting some of the rounds since then. But so like, there's this whole weird, like, chain of evidence issue there where it's just like, God, what a sloppy operation. But based on like Morrissey's new line of questioning, Teske then tells her about this interaction with Thell Reed when he came by to pick up that ammo, because it wasn't that like Thell Reed just came up and picked up that ammo and left. That's when Thell Reed, Seth Kenney, and Teske all went to the set of 1883 Yellowstone, which is like a limited series that was also shooting in that same area. So it's really kind of, this is why it's so confusing, because there's so many different moving parts and like two different sets. But the really crazy thing about that 1883 Yellowstone set is that they were doing like live firing drills on there. And so that's where the ammo can came from, is it was just a can that they were putting all the spent brass in, right?
Is that actually where, I mean, did anybody ever tie that in to the live rounds that were found on sets?
So it's really, so like what's really interesting about this is it's all basically based on this account from Teske, and they did sort of look at like photos of the different bullets and try to compare them, because like they, like they said they had that photo, and then they compared them to like the known round. But I don't think that they were able to really get that far. But it was just all sort of based on this account. But it is sort of backed up in a number of other ways, because like, for example, after they shot and they had the ammo can full of spent brass, like it was actually technically Thell Reed's property. But Teske again took the ammo bucket with the spent brass back to his place, and then Thell subsequently like checked with him after, like a few days after the Rust shooting, saying like, "Hey, do you have that spent brass?" And like Teske was like, "I think I'm gonna hold on to that for right now. Like you can just write that off," because I think he knew that it might be evidence or something like that. So there's other little details that sort of make it, it's not just this guy's testimony. There are some other like puzzle pieces that make it seem more likely. But like, so here, like I kind of wanted to, I filled in some other background details from other sources, because like, just to sort of like validate some of this stuff, like in April 2022, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office released like a huge 550-page report that documented the nature of the live rounds that were found on the Rust set. This is something that I think we've talked about a couple times, and it was really interesting, like looking at this report, because it like went into pretty interesting and minute detail about exactly the kind of calibers and manufacturers of rounds that were found on the scene of the Rust shooting. There were like 4 different like brands of manufacturers of rounds that were found, and
Right.
it also laid out like the locations that the live rounds were found. One was in an ammo box, 2 were on top of a cart, and 1 was in Baldwin's bandolier, or like the strap that he wears with like the ammo.
And 1 was in Ackles's bandolier as well.
Huh.
Ackles is the other, which is
yeah,
crazy.
Jensen Axel. Yeah.
Which is crazy, because I guess the next scene was going to be, I don't know the story of how Rust was going to go down, but it looks like Ackles is one of the actors, and he had a live round on his bandolier.
Yep.
And the next scene that they were going to do was going to be a shootout between Alec and Ackles, who played a sheriff or a cop or something. Yep. And there was going to be a shootout, and they obviously didn't get that far, but it kind of opens up the question as to what, this could have ended differently, but it's equally as bad.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does is very suggestive. The other thing that was really kind of nuts, that like I think I'd heard of before, but just like reading it in this report was like kind of crazy to sort of absorb after sort of knowing how this whole thing turns out, is the other thing is all the live rounds, all 4 live rounds were Starline brass manufactured, which is very odd, because Starline brass doesn't actually make live ammo. What they make are like sort of just like the jackets. They make like super high quality jackets that people like custom load, like people that are like really into like making their own rounds and stuff like that. But they're also
like a refurbished. Yeah.
Right. So, but what's really interesting about that is that like somebody had to make these custom loads, and what was especially confusing is they have the same markings as the dummy rounds that the production was using, which were also Starline brass. And when you see Hannah Gutierrez Reed in her interview with the police, like, them telling her, oh, like all the live rounds were Starline brass manufactured, she doesn't seem to be aware of like what Starline brass is and that they only make like dummy rounds. So it's like it's pretty obvious that she was like way out of her depth. And we'll touch on that again a little bit later, but I kind of want to foreshadow that because it's hard to say, like, because who knows if there's some weird conspiracy here, but like there's just so many weird suggestive things that seem like it was like some kind of sabotage. And with all these like weird gun guys, who knows? Anyway.
Well, I mean, the fact that the camera, all the cameramen walked off that day.
Yeah.
I mean, we cannot rule that out. And I kind of thought that suspicious from day one. Maybe that bullet
I just always try to.
Maybe that bullet was meant for Alec, for all I know.
Yeah. I'm always trying to sound like a little bit of like a note of caution because I don't want to be like super conspiracy guy, but it's just very suggestive. It's very suggestive. And it gets even weirder because Kenney calls Corporal Hancock, the lead investigator, the redhead, in October 2022. And at that point, Kenney is pointing the finger at yet another supplier of blanks named Joe Swanson, who runs a company called Motion Picture Blanks. So like Kenney's like saying, like earlier he's saying, a couple weeks after the shooting, it was Thell Reed and Hannah Gutierrez Reed. In October 22, he now says, I think it was Joe Kenney, Joe Swanson, who runs another competitor, I assume, of selling motion picture props, and his suspicions were based on the fact that Swanson had previously made live rounds using Starline brass components, which is like, that's what your suspicions based on. It just seems like a weird, I don't know. It's like that's what like they're for basically, unless you're making dummy rounds from them. It's just like, it seems like a very thin sort of basis for this, but anyway, it just seems like Kenney's
like at the time, rounds were very expensive during that time.
Oh yeah,
and I know a lot of people that were refurbing ammunition at that time, but but you would think they would be able to trace it back to who refurbished it. There's a lot that goes into refurbishing a round.
Yeah,
a lot. But you would think that they would be able to trace it back, but it just seems like somewhere along the line that it just got skewed.
Yeah. The other thing to mention about Starline Brass, the company, is like they're, I don't know a whole lot about guns, but from my understanding is that they're a pretty high-end manufacturer of this type of stuff. Like they're made in the USA and they supposedly use really high quality, and they're also like, I think like some of their products are based on like the designs from like the Old West and something like that. So like a lot of people, for those type of rounds, I think they usually go in a revolver, or I don't know. It's just, they seem like they could be very expensive. And for their product category, they're pretty high end. Anyway, this takes us back to Kenney, Thell Reed, and Teske taking the ammo to the 1883 Yellowstone set. This was it was discussed in the 550-page report from the sheriff's office, and Thell Reed said that he and Kenney had supervised live firing training on the 1883 Yellowstone set, and Thell said that Kenney kept the reloaded rounds that had been used in the live training, and further said that Kenney refused to return to him the spent brass, which actually belonged to Thell shortly after the Rust shooting. So, like I said, we have this statement from Thell that backs up, in essence, the account of Teske. And again, like this, it's like these three like gun guys, like it's just like hard to sort of, I had to like listen to Nikas's presentation a couple times in a row because I was like, who's he talking about here? Who's he talking about here? I'm pretty sure I've got the details right, but anyway. At this point, Nikas then describes how Thell and Kenney did the live fire on the 1883 Yellowstone set and the subsequent issue with the ammo can. And this seems like, it seems kind of nuts to me that like they would be doing live fire stuff at this other set. And basically their reasoning was they wanted to have like the actors and crew like understand like how the recoil worked. It just seems like a pretty
like training exercises. They keep hammering it in though that like, live ammo is not allowed near a movie set, but apparently they were right down the hill on 1883. using live rounds. So I don't know what to think anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly paints a picture of like, we were talking about last stream or the stream before about how the people on the Rust that were alleged to have been doing plinking, or there was confirmed in some detail, but it wouldn't surprise me at all, because it seems like that's just sort of how these guys operate. I mean, they do live firing right next to a movie set. It seems like you wouldn't want to cross those streams, but apparently they do. Anyway, I'm almost done here. Teske told Morrissey in their November 2023 pretrial interview that he thought the ammo that was in the ammo can was the same ammo that killed Helena Hutchins. Morrissey at this point tells Teske to preserve the ammo, right? He thinks it's evidence. And she also asks like follow-up questions, asking if like Teske is aware of any evidence that the Rust shooting was a sabotage, which is an interesting question for Morrissey to ask at this juncture. Teske, a helpful guy that likes to volunteer useful information, says, yes, in fact, Seth Kenney called me during the Rust filming and said that he, Kenney, wanted to get Hannah Gutierrez Reed fired.
Kenney was apparently threw her under the bus like I've never seen anyone thrown under a bus before.
It's so weird. Like, I get the sense that there was like a weird hostility between this small world of like armor people, and they're, probably competing for business, or who knows, and for jobs. But Kenney was telling Teske that he was like unsure of how to do this and worried about Thell Reed not being happy about it. So anyway, Nikas mentioned that Sarah Zachary was the person who disposed of the bullets on set. Police were unsure.
Which they never did. They never found those, correct?
No, they didn't. It's just like another detail that's like so random. There's so many like moving parts. That's Sarah Zachary. She testified briefly. I think it was like yesterday. And then the other one that here's Thell Reed. This guy is like, he's like, I think in his like late 70s, early 80s nowadays, but he's like a legendary trick shooter and armor guy. He's the father of Hannah. And he seems like a lot of the people like in that world are sort of competing for his approval. It's sort of a weird deal, but
I like how his fingers on the trigger in that picture. Nice.
Yeah. I need to go back to that. That's a good point. I didn't even think of that.
Lord, what is going on? I don't even understand this anymore.
Wow, it's like right stuck in the guard. Wow, what a nutball,
man! It's like, dude, what are you guys doing?
And the texts, there's so many crazy things. With the police were never able to determine whether or not they were the live bullets, because Zachary disposed of them, so they weren't able to be recovered. So they don't know like what the bullets are she threw away. But she did admit to them that she threw away some bullets. And she was on set and texting with Kenney, the guy who Teske said was trying to sabotage Hannah in the wake of the shooting. And Zachary was also angry with Hannah, apparently, from her texts. So then Morrissey, the lead prosecutor, the one that was on the stand at the end of the trial, shaming herself, groveling, she doesn't end up actually retrieving the ammo that Teske told her about. And this is like the second time that apparently Teske has told the prosecutor's office about this ammo, and they've done nothing. So this is in November 2023. At the end of Hannah's trial, Teske finally just brings the ammo can and turns it over on March 6, 2024. And they showed this today. They had like a guy testify that was actually at the sheriff's office. And they showed his like body cam footage. His name was Lieutenant Brian Brandel, and he just
he brought this can to the sheriff's office.
Yep. At the end of Hannah's,
Merry Christmas, guys. Is that how this works?
I guess he felt like compelled, because like nobody was getting back to him, and he's like, shit, her trial's ending. Like, you might want this. And so he goes and just turns it over to this Lieutenant Brandel is apparently like the supervising officer on duty. And so, today's trial, part of what they showed in the motion hearing was, just for chain of custody, like Brandel's body cam footage of Teske showing up and turning over the bullets.